What up, everyone? This is the Twice Over Film Club, and I'm your host, Faraz. Today, we're discussing Interstellar in depth. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast and follow us at the Twice Over on all the socials. Check out thetwiceover.com to see your tally for this movie and every other movie we've done. For example, Interstellar has a distribution of 74 to 88, meaning what makes this movie great for us is the narrative and aesthetics, but we did not feel that things such as the writing or the acting were all that special overall. See how it stacks up for you based on your order and let us know if you agree or not. Also, you can find us on Letterboxd. I include that in with all the socials. Alright, let's move on to the episode. Alright everyone, we're back now with our discussion on Interstellar, 2014 Christopher Nolan film. Make sure you've listened to our preview episode. If you have not seen the movie, that is a spoiler-free episode. This episode will contain spoilers. Alright, I'm back with Yusuf and Farhan. Yusuf, you wanna...
Did you forget?
Did you forget who you were
Why
with?
did you hesitate, dude? You should start with me.
We've been sitting here for 10 days just waiting for you to come
10 days
back
just waiting for us. You ate all my potato chips.
What?
We felt very much like Romilly waiting on the ship for the characters to come back from Miller's planet. Okay, it was exactly like that. And we're just standing here like, it's been 10 days.
Yeah. Alright, so this movie is not nearly as complicated as the more recent movie we did, Tenet, but we still think it would be helpful to have an overall synopsis to get us started. So, Yusuf, you want to get that going?
I'm ready. Feel free to disagree, by the way. So, let's see. I'm going to do this as succinctly as possible, but this movie focuses on Cooper, a farmer who has a daughter and a son, living in kind of I would say a dystopian world where, crops are not growing as they used to. There's a lot of dust storms on the planet, and generally the planet is becoming unsustainable, probably due to human treatment of the planet. As part of that, there's a secret science program that is trying to determine whether there is a life-sustaining planet out there. Cooper gets roped into this and, ends up leaving his family behind in order to go look for a sustainable planet, very much to the chagrin of his daughter particularly, who is, just heartbroken that he's leaving her behind. They end up traveling through a wormhole to assess some planets near a black hole far away in another galaxy. As it turns out, their first couple attempts at looking for planets that would be sustainable to human life are both failures. On top of that, because of the effects of gravity near a black hole, time is warped and speeds up, which means that they waste, decades just spending a couple hours trying to assess these planets.
1 hour is 7 years.
Yeah, at least on the first planet, right?
Yeah, first planet.
It's crazy. And eventually approach a second planet where they meet a quite deranged astronaut who tries to retake their ship in order to get away from the planet he's been marooned on for several years. Eventually, realizing that they don't have the resources to make it back to Earth, Cooper ejects himself into the black hole to give the remaining astronaut a chance at starting a new colony on a new planet. And as part of that experience, he realizes that he can communicate back to his daughter and help her to save humanity on Earth before the planet becomes totally unsustainable. In the end, he is successful in communicating with her and gets the remaining humans on Earth away from the planet in time, and meets his daughter one more time before she passes away. However, because of the effects of warp time, she's much older than him at this point. And that pretty much sums it up, I think. That's a quick overview, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I would just input, as far as the ending goes, we have Brand. What's her first name as a character? I just know her as Brand because that's how Cooper mentions her. Anyway, I would point out for the ending, since Brand is on a planet now because of Cooper's sacrifice, presumed sacrifice to her, she is starting up a colony there, and Cooper is going to go back out there, and the movie finishes with him going to go to her, basically.
Yeah, that's right. So she's on a third planet trying to establish life there. By the way, her name is Amelia Brand, if that wasn't clear, and her father is Professor John Brand. So they do have names. Christopher Nolan can be bogus to female characters, but he's not that bogus. At least not this time around.
Yeah, I mean, I more or less he's referred to as Brand because they're referred to by their last names.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys have in mind in terms of discussion points? Can we start with one open question that I think we all had and any viewer would have had, which
Sure.
is, we don't really get a real answer for who initially put the wormhole there, who actually saves Cooper when he goes into the black hole and sets up this 5D dimensional library that he's now using to communicate with a past Murph. So like
Yeah, that he happens to fall into.
Yeah, like so. I mean, Tars kind of explains it. He just says they put this here for us. Like they're in their five dimensional universe, and it's not ever really actually explained. So what is the explanation to that? Is there a concrete explanation?
Well, I think that personally, I think this is just a way of them circumventing a religious discussion while still trying to make a higher entity kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Whether you believe in that or not, they're just saying they, whether it be some scientific entity or they as in like God or gods or whatever. What do you guys think? I mean, that's the read that I got from it.
So I think that's actually a fair take on it. But realistically, I think there is some ties back to, concrete evidence in this movie. Let's start with the fact that in that final sequence, we actually, we do hear Cooper kind of say, it was never them, it was us, right? Yeah. So what does that mean? Let's break that down. Actually, we just talked about this because I think Christopher Nolan, personally, if he believes in time travel, he believes in a paradoxical theory of time travel, right? And that is that you can never really change what happened, but if you were to time travel, you would only be affecting things in a way that results in the outcome that you already experienced, right? So, while Cooper may travel back in time at the end of this movie, we see him only do things that he already saw or his daughter already saw happening in the world during her childhood, right? So he moves books off her bookshelf and kind of nudges them. He tries to leave a message in there. He leaves kind of a code in binary by shifting gravity in her bedroom, right? So all of those things were things that he experienced, and he ends up carrying them out at a later time by traveling through time. So this comes to a broader point that if this is truly paradoxical, what does Matthew McConaughey, or what does Cooper mean when he says it was always us? My theory is that the human race survives as a result of what Cooper and Murph do in this movie, right? At some point later in time, let's just say that humans evolve into higher beings, or just by their own survival, they establish more technology. And then they are responsible for making sure that their race survives so that they can come into existence, right? So essentially, there is kind of this shadowy hand from the future, which is the surviving and evolving human race that actually comes back to create the Tesseract to ensure their own survival. As well as to open the wormhole to let Cooper and the team actually reach the black hole for that to happen in the first place.
So this is what I don't get. That is the general theory I was going with too. That it's just future generations of humans that have evolved to such a point that their intelligence has allowed them to go back and do things like this.
Right.
Now, how would they ever evolve into that being without this having already happened? Like, it just seems like a closed circuit loop to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, one thing can't be without the other. Then how did they ever? I don't know. Like,
exactly. But that is paradoxical time travel, right? We see this in a lot of movies. This is kind of, again, this is kind of a big popular theory in the sci-fi space.
Is it just sci-fi, man? Doesn't Elon Musk adhere to this stuff? We should get him on the podcast.
That's true. We should get Elon Musk. Elon Musk, open invitation to come on the Twice Over and discuss paradoxical theories of time travel. But
you can smoke all the weed you want.
That is true. You can. We're not going to stop
Hey,
you.
Illinois, we're good.
Anyways,
Yeah, we're not breaking any rules here. We're not Fahad. We don't do illegal things on podcasts. So yeah, basically the idea and that you're hitting on is perfect. You know, it's a chicken or the egg problem. One couldn't have happened without the other, but one is necessary for the other to happen. So which one happens first? The answer in paradoxical theory is that neither comes first. Time is a flat circle. Shout out to Matthew McConaughey in True Detective, who says that. But
True.
it's basically something that is a little bit of a paradox is by nature. It seems nonsensical on its face because we can't really figure out which one happened first, and that's the chicken or the egg problem. But that is exactly in line with the scientific theory behind that type of time travel. So I think you're hitting on something that's like itching your brain and it's bothering you, but that's exactly where you're supposed to land.
So then it circles back to, I think, what Farhan said, just circumventing the topic of, I guess, a higher entity or a god or something, and finding an alternate explanation, I guess.
Explain that more. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
If there is no god, then there has to be something, and that something is just us in the future.
Right, exactly. So I guess you could buy into either theory you want, that it's either evolved humans or that it's some sort of divine entity, right? I think that is a fairly popular take of this movie, that there is divine intervention going on in that black hole scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what you took away from it, Farhan, right?
That's not necessarily what I took away. I thought that that's what they were trying to do. But I mean, this is not me. I didn't really read into the other evidences that are laid out like you did because you're a lawyer. So,
I'm a nerd. That's the first problem. It's not. You can blame the lawyer side of me, but
You're a nerd, but that just enhances your job. But yeah, so I mean, looking at it like that, I could totally see the evolved human beings sort of deal. I mean, that does make more sense to me now, and less of the higher power stuff. But still, whenever you have something like this, what is the word I'm trying to say? Grand. Abstract, just like perceptually even abstract, and even just there has to be some kind of explanation because it's so out of worldly, and that's the whole deal. You know what I mean? I'm not really saying anything here. You're gonna cut all this out.
To be fair, I actually have no issue with having like this being an open-ended question and not being resolved in the movie.
I don't have an issue with it.
It doesn't hinder my experience for the movie whatsoever. It's just something that I feel like it's the only part of the plot or the story that kind of was open-ended. I thought otherwise it was pretty well. It was very specific and it was explained very easily, so I didn't think it was too complicated.
Like how he ended up when he went into that wormhole, and he ended up to be right in that, which you call that, you refer to as like a library or something like that.
Yeah.
The Tesseract is what they call it in the movie.
The Tesseract. And I mean, maybe there's a reason for this. I don't know. Yusuf, maybe you can expound on this. I don't know. But I thought it was such a happy coincidence that he happened to come out right upon that area where...
I think this goes into the themes that Yusuf had, and that like it would be the love, right, that he has for his kids. Like that's why his Tesseract is that.
So each person's Tesseract is personalized to a particular place or a particular scene? Well, a particular time in their life, or what is it?
Yeah, perhaps. I think it depends how much you kind of want to rely on like these higher beings that are controlling things, because I do think Tars, who is the robot, who, by the way, great character. I think he mentions essentially, he doesn't say it in so many words, but he hints at the fact that like this was set up for a reason and for a specific purpose, and the Tesseract closes as soon as Cooper carries out that purpose. So essentially that is to say that the higher beings were specifically relying on Cooper's relationship with his daughter to make sure that the thing that needed to get done gets done. So it is his love to an extent, but as to why it opened up on that exact moment and paralleled that particular relationship, that was a purposeful thing that they built only to accomplish that specific goal, right? So like it's not that like everyone's Tesseract kind of relies on whatever is closest to their heart. It's rather that the higher beings knew that this is how
That's
we're
what
going to
they
get this
needed.
done, and so we're
Yeah.
we're gonna target this specific relationship and this specific person, and they would know that because they only exist because of his survival in the first place, right? So they have the knowledge from the future in order to carry that out.
Yeah. So if that's so, and that's kind of what I was afraid that it was, and not that this matters, but it's too happy of a coincidence, or it's too, I don't know. That's way too randomly precise
Well, I mean, I
for
guess
me
what I'm saying is
personally.
that
But
I guess I'm saying it's not a coincidence, right?
I know, and that it all relies on that one thing. Like
Right, but
that's
that's
you
a little
know,
bit too much emphasis on that higher being concept, right? Is that what you're saying?
mm.
That it's like it's a little too not
Yeah,
not
it's such
not that it's a coincidence, but it's still just too convenient.
it's too convenient. That's the word I'm looking for, really. And so, just for me personally, that part really took me away from it. But again, not that matters. That's just a personal opinion of mine.
Well, on that note, we've talked about two theories, right? Either it's higher evolved beings or it's some sort of divine intervention. Let me throw a third one at you that I think it fits just as well as the others, okay? Um, there is no reason. I think we can talk a little bit more about kind of the scientific accuracy of this movie, but for a certain, we don't know what happens once you get inside a black hole. Beyond the veil, right? And you're inside the darkness, right? We don't know what happens, but everything would lead one to believe that you would basically be crushed under the gravity of the black hole, and you would
Mm-hmm.
cease to exist. Okay, if that is true, which is obviously the theories we've been discussing depart from science at that moment, which I'm okay with. But let's say let's pare it back and let's stick with the science. Let's say Cooper died at that moment. Everything we see after that is just him kind of playing out his relationship with his daughter for one last time, and kind of taking him to a happy place. If you can buy that, it actually ties very well into some things that are hinted at earlier in the movie.
By what, Dr.
On
Mann?
Dr. Mann's planet, the conversation that Cooper has with him right before Dr. Mann tries to, essentially murder him is he says, what do you see right before you're dying? You see your life flash before your eyes. We see our children. That's the human connection, right? That prompts us to struggle a little bit longer because that's the one thing we want. We want to see our kids again, right? So what do you guys think about that? What if he really doesn't make it out at all, and we're just kind of seeing, the last electrical impulses, crossing, through his brain before he gets crushed.
Yeah, I mean, totally possible.
Totally possible. Not the one I'm going to go with because it's a little too dark.
It's a little too dark, right? Because that means that humanity really doesn't survive. Anything that we saw, especially even seeing, Dr. Brandt, not Dr. Brandt, Amelia Brandt, we see her go to a third planet and try to establish a colony. That probably none of that happened, right? That's
Mhm.
kind of where we would have to land. Or maybe it does, but we have no reason to know whether it does or not, because after that point, we're just seeing things playing out in Cooper's mind. So I think if you want to be kind of the realist in this film, that's kind of the theory that you would probably have to buy in order to validate kind of the ending. And I just want to point out that Christopher Nolan actually, he left it open-ended enough for a purpose. When he was asked about this in an interview, he actually, I'll read you his quote. He essentially said, you're just going to have to go back and see it again. It's there for you to make what you make of it. People
Mhm.
always have radically different interpretations of things that I put in there, but I know what I think, and I don't like it to have any more validity than the experience you have watching it. So again, he's very emphatic about the pristine viewing experience of the audience, and he kind of says that if that interpretation is there, it's there for a reason. I'm not going to tell you one way or another what actually happened at the end.
I know. I like that. I like when directors like to leave it up to the audience.
Yeah. I've tried not to say a lot because I don't want to offend any Nolan fanboys.
All right, so you don't like that though. I take it.
It's cool to, at this point, he's kind of becoming like, to me, it's sort of like a one-trick pony. Like it's every movie's got this thing where you can interpret it. It started with Inception, and it was like cool, right? Like it was like, oh, like haven't seen this kind of level of complexity in a movie in terms of the different avenues that this could be going. Is that last scene, is that real? Is it not real? And then it's just like every single movie, that's sort of the thing. And when him saying stuff like that, I'm like, are you just saying that because that's a cop out and you didn't really think this through? I don't think that's the case. But there's enough people asking that question, and I know that for sure. And again, this all comes to opinion. Yusuf, you love this kind of thing, so this is amazing for you. I mean, if Nolan wrote a novel series, you would eat it up. Personally,
I would probably read it before eating it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Well, no, because he would make it so that like you can only really understand it if you taste it in your intestine. Your intestine absorbs secret eggs information that's in there. You like that? The eggs?
Yeah.
Egg reference? Personally,
I think you're right though, right? Like, he's come to rely on that a little bit too much. I was okay with it in 2014. I'll say that, right? Because Inception, like you said, was kind of the first take at it. Interstellar is much less open-ended than Inception, because Inception is in your face, like which way do you go, one way or the other. This one's kind of couched in there where you're led to believe one dominant outcome, and there's enough breadcrumbs that if you really want to try to explain it the other way, it's there. So I think for that reason, I'm okay with it. But you're right. What director is gonna say like, no, I wasn't thinking about that at all, you made that up? Any director, when they're asked, they're gonna say like, yeah, it was intentionally open-ended. So you can only put so much weight in his statement there. But I do like that there's enough there to kind of reinterpret it if you are kind of a strict scientist here. So I guess I'll leave it there for that.
So let me touch on like the science fiction thing, and this is kind of a thought that I sort of had, and I'm a little bit deterring away from this movie, but I'm really not. This is about Nolan. Is Dark Knight science fiction? Any of the Batman movies, do you consider that science fiction?
At a certain degree, yeah, because of the technology being used, really.
Yes, but I would agree that.
But it's not based in real science,
right? There's some technology that's a little bit advanced, or you can even say outlandish in certain points. But I don't think that's like really a science fiction movie. I would certainly not put it in the science fiction genre, because those types of things that type of extrapolation is par for the course for a superhero movie, which although Batman doesn't have any special powers himself, it's certainly a superhero movie, right? So I think I wouldn't call it science fiction on its face, although maybe technically there is some scientific stretching going on.
Yeah, the only reason I would say it's not maybe a science fiction movie is because the world itself is not, I guess, scientifically driven to like a different type of world. I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but it's just it's more or less what we have today in the world. A little more deteriorated, a little like it's more like social aspects that are different, not so much technology aspects.
Does science fiction require that though? I don't think it does. I mean, look at would you guys name some other pieces of science fiction? I mean,
I'm not the biggest sci-fi guy, but like Blade Runner comes to mind. Blade Runner 2049.
Shape of Water arguably is science fiction, correct?
Well, no, I think that's where I think anything that
is that not science fiction?
I think anything that has something that's not scientifically explainable, that doesn't necessarily make it science fiction, because in that case, a lot of action movies would be science fiction, just because they have some outlandish action scene, you know what I mean? So it's kind of
Project Power.
Project Power, right? And that's not a science fiction movie, but they do have some scientific or made up technology in that movie. So it's tough. I'm not sure how I would subjectively draw that line.
I think there's a lot of people, a lot of Comic-Con fans who would completely disagree with you, because science fiction, I would say the bulk of it is stuff that, according to your estimations, would not be science fiction.
Well, what's your point here, Far, in regards to Interstellar?
I really just wanted to touch on the science fiction aspect, because we've been doing a lot of Nolan movies, and for the purpose of science fiction, we're going into the science and all that stuff a lot. So I just kind of wanted to explore that category and what that actually means, because there are other movies that I do consider science fiction. Mm-hmm. Shape of Water just being one of them. There's a couple of others that I was thinking about, and I just can't think of them for a second, but they approach the science fiction, but it doesn't hamper other parts of the movie. And I'm trying to move away from the narrative here a little bit, because that's just one part of this movie, because we're talking about the exposition centered dialogue, And the way that, things just progress so quickly throughout this whole movie, so going into the direction a little bit, like it's one thing after another thing after another thing after another thing, and other movies are able to still do science fiction and approach it in a way that they're still able to do the other parts well. Black Mirror as a show, I would say, does that extremely well. The acting is incredible. The direction is incredible for most of the episodes, not all of them for sure, but it's definitely like we watch it and we think that this is movie worthy. If it was a movie, it'd be up for awards, in my opinion.
I think the difference here is just the direction the director wants to take, and I think Christopher Nolan likes things to be like tight and buttoned up when the science is being explored, whereas others maybe will leave it more up to the viewer to just accept it as is and focus on other aspects of the movie.
Yeah, and I think Shape of Water is a good example of that, right? There's something going on that's a little bit unexplainable, but that's certainly not like a core tenet of the tenet. That's certainly not a core principle of the movie, right? It's not a central focus, so then you can kind of get away with that. But yeah, that's kind of a choice, and it's probably those are kind of like two different avenues you can take as a movie, even if you call all those science fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the science I do think one of the reasons this movie is so interesting is because of how much it relies on science.
The guy that you said is the same guy they got the same guy for Tenet. I think we talked about this in Tenet. They had the same dude, and it's really, really cool that they did that. And you were talking about like those the stuff that came out of this movie and actually led up to stuff. That's really awesome. In terms of it being crazy scientifically accurate, just like Tenet, I don't know if that's Nolan's aim. He just wanted to do enough to make it like interesting, but I don't think that he's saying this is what it's like. What do you think?
I think he is saying that. So I would make the distinction that I don't think this movie is just like Tenet at all. Because I do think, although Kip Thorne probably was involved in both of them, there certainly was a different approach in Tenet where I think we discussed this, right? He kind of said that, he kind of wanted the concepts to be loosely accurate in that movie. Over here, on the other hand, he really tried to hammer down and drill into the science. And there are certainly points where he departs from that, but they were kind of very selectively chosen. So to your point, it's not 100% scientifically accurate by any means, but he does stay very close to the real concepts as much as possible throughout, a bulk of this film. Let's start. Let's just talk through a few of them. So, for example, the idea that time moves slower as you approach a black hole, 100% backed by science, and particularly the theory of relativity, right? Einstein's theory that kind of ties space, time, and gravity together in a relationship. That is something that's real. I was surprised to find out they've actually tested this. They've synchronized watches and sent an astronaut up into space and then compared after a certain amount of time or travel when he returns to Earth. And our time on Earth moves slower, which means that just by the effects of the gravity of the Earth, we're moving slower. Of course, that would be heavily amplified if it was an object as massive as a black hole. But the theory behind it kind of holds true. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And so I think kind of the one thing I wonder is, did he exaggerate that concept? Because the idea that they go onto Dr. Miller's planet, I think it is the first planet they go to, and like time is moving. What is it, like 1 hour equals like 7 years? 7 years in space. That might be a little bit exaggerated. I don't know if time moves that quickly as you approach a black hole, or maybe it doesn't accelerate that quickly, whatever the distance is between Romilly and the rest of the team in that sequence. I don't know if it moves that quickly, but at least the general concept does back up to the science.
Well, Dr. Miller's planet, it's because it's so close to a black hole that time on the planet moves that fast, right?
Right, but I guess
they don't use the slingshot method until after that, because they realized how much time was wasted there because of what's the white dude that got caught in the water? Ends up taking longer. It ends up taking longer, so they wasted more time.
He's astronaut number 4.
So basically, like, it's because of that they realized, oh man, we need to use this slingshot maneuver towards the black hole to make up for some of the time we just lost.
Right, exactly.
and fuel.
But I guess my question is that Romilly was not that far away from them. He was just orbiting around the planet. So he's himself in the spaceship still pretty close to the black hole. So how
Yeah,
was
I
the
guess.
time
I don't
difference
know.
between them so much? I'm not sure. Maybe that is
Yeah.
realistic because I'm sure as you approach a black hole, it exponentially increases in terms of the time warping. But I
Hmm.
thought that was pretty cool. But let's talk about the scene on Dr. Miller's planet for a second. Cinematically, one of my favorite scenes.
Oh, because of the water and how it's about to come down and crash, and she thinks it's the mountains or something.
Yeah, I just thought
Yeah.
that scene was beautiful, and it's only really like a 3 or 4 minute sequence, but man, does it hit! I think
Yeah.
part of it is the music, the scoring on that track. Hans Zimmer, just masterpiece. It's called Mountains, and if you go back and listen to it, the entire song or the entire score is based on kind of the ticking of a clock, and it gets like faster and faster, and it really like conveys the urgency of that scene and how things are going off kilter. It starts out pretty beautiful. It gets terrifying at points, and it gets beautiful again as kind of the waves are cresting.
Hmm.
I love the sound in that scene.
Interesting.
I would go back and watch just that one sequence.
Mm-hmm.
I really think like that scene was very well thought through and kind of hit on all cylinders.
I mean, I felt like there was a lot of those scenes. To be honest, that is one of them. Another, like, every scene of the spaceship, just from a very wide angle with the entire space or like the black hole planets behind it. All of those look insanely sick. Another great scene was when Cooper is maneuvering the spaceship after Dr. Mann has destroyed part of the, what's the ship that they're docking on called? Like, what's it? The mothership. It's they're spinning, right? They're trying to match the speed of the spin because of the crash that Dr. Mann caused. I thought that was a pretty intense scene, just like that, with the music working perfectly and the visuals being perfect. It was just, that was immersive.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was very similar in the same regards. That was one of my favorite sequences from and let's talk about this as well. I mean, from the point that Dr. Mann kind of reveals himself as a villain,
Hmm.
to the point that they successfully dock back on the ship. It's just complete. I don't know what to call it. I mean, it was just anxiety and chaos for that entire sequence. And again, the music does a lot to keep you gripped in that moment.
Yeah, and I want to point out that Dr. Mann, I mean, that's a good villain actually. Like, comes out of nowhere, and is pretty scary because of how like committed he is. Matt Damon is a good actor at the same time, so that helps a lot, of course. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but how cringy did you guys feel? Just like shivers going down your spine at how cringy it was when he was like leaving. He's like, Do you see your kids now? Oh, I can't watch.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't watch. It
For
was
some,
so
that goes on the
freaking. That was like
writing.
horrible to me.
Yeah, fine.
but yes, I totally agree with you. But I have to say, Matt Damon being cast in that scene was kind of a stroke of genius.
Oh yeah.
When have you ever seen him play a villain, right? You really
Well,
haven't. He's kind of just generally kind of a good guy. He's usually the protagonist in most films, right? And so when he comes into this movie, by the way, he goes completely uncredited in this film, so nobody had any idea he was in this film going into the
yeah,
viewing, unless you had heard from somebody who had just watched it, right?
yeah,
So first of all, he hits you on the face. Very Bollywood thing to do, right? That's where like Salman Khan
yeah, yeah,
comes in
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
final.
yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
I think it's it's done to great effect in this movie because it's not a very common thing to do in Hollywood, and especially not with somebody who's that big name. And when he comes into this movie, you immediately believe everything he's telling you just because
Yeah,
of what your internal biases towards Matt Damon tell you. He's usually the protagonist, so you're not doubting a lot of the stuff he tells you. Everything he's telling you is a lie.
yeah,
And it's not until he kind of reveals himself on your own that you can really spot that. I thought that
Yeah,
was great. I thought that was great casting and
same.
great use kind of the real life reputation of an actor to really make sure that the role was buttoned up properly. So that caught me completely off guard, and that is why that's one of my favorite sequences. But yeah, I gotta say, as it's kind of being carried out, there is some like dry humor kind of built into that scene where he's like kind of like trying to crack Cooper's mask by just like smashing his helmet against his, right.
yeah.
But yeah, there's certain lines that get delivered in there that are a little bit too on the nose. And we talked about that, right? The writing is a little bit clunky at times. I think that's certainly one place where it shows out.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about how villains are hard to do. I thought they did a villain pretty good this time.
Yeah,
I think I'd agree. Yeah.
Sure.
It's funny because if you compare that to the villain in Tenet, I think this is like an A+. But yeah, what are you gonna do? It's still not perfect here.
Interesting piece of info. Has nothing to do with the villain or anything. Just overall in the movie. Do you guys know who was originally slated to direct this movie in 2006?
I have no idea.
Steven Spielberg.
Wow! Thank God it wasn't him.
Jonathan Nolan, who's Christopher Nolan's brother. He's the one who wrote the screenplay. But and then in 2012, Spielberg was like he has other projects, so he didn't do this movie. Then Jonathan Nolan suggested his brother Christopher Nolan. So we can't give like I'm not trying to like put Nolan down, but it's just interesting of how much whenever we watch a movie we give the director so much credit for stuff that they may not have even had anything to do with. But I'm sure this would have been a completely different movie had Spielberg directed it. A much lower rated movie in my opinion, probably. Yeah. And I think we kind of dodged a bullet.
That's probably true. Just to point out, Jonathan Nolan does write on most of Christopher Nolan's movies. That's become kind of a trend. And I don't know if it's the best thing, right? Because like we've discussed, the writing's not perfect in this movie. But you kind of lose some objectivity when you're using the same writer all the time and it's your own brother. I don't know how that really affects. And Christopher Nolan helps him with the writing often. He's often co-credited with him. So, the blame goes everywhere for something like that, I think. But it's certainly not perfect here. But yeah, you're right. It's a better movie than I can imagine it would have been with Steven Spielberg. And particularly kind of, again, sticking to the nuts and bolts of the science. I think that's a lot better done here than Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg would have had some alien entity on screen.
Well, E.T. would have made a cameo.
Yeah, in the Tesseract, right? We would have seen E.T.
Yeah, just randomly.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, and then
hilarious.
Cooper would have said, "I want to go home. I want to go back to my daughter," and E.T. would have been like,
dude.
"Phone home," and then would have opened the Tesseract.
No, that's what happens after going through the black hole. He turns into E.T. That's where E.T. comes from. It's a flashback, dude.
Oh man, this is all one big universe. Oh,
honestly,
wow.
that would have got a 100 narrative score from me.
Get out of here. Oh my goodness.
That would have been, and then like Jaws, like the thing actually came from that planet, that wave.
So this is a Spielberg universe that we've stumbled upon.
This is a dude. Whew. All right, I've changed my score to 400, dude. Just for everything, for all of it. It's all 400.
So I think one other thing that we have to address in terms of the science is the opening of a wormhole, right? Wormholes we know theoretically are possible, but we just don't know how they would possibly occur. The theory is that you need pretty much a black hole or a very massive object to open up a wormhole, and that's like a rip in the fabric of time-space, so you can travel from one place to the other inside space at an accelerated rate. And so I think basic theory says you need something like a massive object and the opposite of a black hole, I guess, which would be a white hole. And those two things colliding could like rip open a wormhole. So theoretically, we know like it's possible, but like we just don't know how it would happen in that specific location. And again, you kind of have to rely on, okay, that's where probably the higher beings would come in. They have the technology to do it or whatever. But that's kind of where we kind of depart again. So one thing that really bothered me, one scene that really bothered me, is that they try to explain this concept on screen, which I think they effectively do, but you have Romilly on the ship explaining to Cooper with a piece of paper that like, okay, we're here and the black hole is here and we're gonna rip a hole through the paper over here, right? Like, obviously that makes, like, how is an astronaut in the middle of his mission, like, and Cooper is just like, wait, so like, where are we going? How does this work? Like, obviously he has to know that already, right? He's an engineer and he's an astronaut at this point, but that's clear exposition for the benefit of the viewer, right? To kind of explain that very succinctly, and I think they do that well. It's just that, like, obviously, realistically, that scene should never happen between two astronauts in the middle of space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that actually gets me to one point where I didn't like about the movie is how Cooper and Murph come across the NASA facility and he's just part of the mission like right away. It's just like, what?
Yeah, I've got
how
a whole
does this
list
happen?
of stuff exactly like that, but with exactly that NASA scene, that one in particular, I was just like, this does not make any sense. Like NASA, we're made to believe, we're supposed to get the feeling that NASA doesn't even exist outside of this secret place,
Mm-hmm.
right? That it's been gone for years and years, probably decades. That's the impression we're supposed to get. And then they find out this thing is NASA, and they don't even show much excitement. They just walk through stuff and like seeing all the stuff. He's not even shocked. He's not even surprised. There's no astonishment. And his daughter, who's supposedly like she's obsessed with science. She doesn't even show like, they're not like, our minds are blown. He's just walking through it, and then there's more exposition dialogue.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and to your point, like he is built up as a character who is forced to be a farmer by the the situation that mankind is in. And that's not where his passion is. He wants to be a pilot. He wants to be an engineer. So this should be like the most exciting, most fulfilling moment for him. And they probably just didn't have time to really like play that out. But yeah, it feels a little bit flat for what kind of discovery they just made, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, another place where the exposition is a little too on the nose is at the very end when Murph is figuring everything out. When she's back at the home, she's in the bedroom and she's goes through the watch. It happens so quickly, so fast.
Oh yeah.
And like her moment of clarity of like it coming together just happens so quickly that I guess it's easy to digest. And again, there obviously is time constraints and all that stuff.
But this
It
is the
just
thing.
felt like, it's just pushing the narrative or the story to conclude it
Yeah.
rather than, I guess, exploring and how it would actually happen.
Yeah, 'cause it's
or
like a 2.5
getting
hour
deeper.
movie plus at that point
It's
already.
3
right?
hours. It's almost 3 hours.
Yeah, so
It's-
it's just like it was infeasible to play that out more, and that's
Yeah.
that's a time management issue, right? Because if you're gonna do a 3 hour movie, first of all you have to. I mean, I think he does a good job of keeping the attention most of the way, but like really you have very limited resources to work with at that point, and it could have used more resources there for sure. Because man,
it's 2 hours and 50 minutes.
the scene that follows the one that you just mentioned, I mean, so she realizes very quickly what's going on. I'm kind of okay with that. Then she walks outside and goes to confront her brother, right? By the way, Casey Affleck, I thought, did a fairly good job in this movie, and he was a good juxtaposition to Jessica Chastain in terms of, Murph is very... She hasn't given up on her father, but she's very angry, right? On the other hand, Casey Affleck's character, whose name is escaping me, but the son is the opposite. He is totally committed to his father, but he knows he's not coming back, and so that's why he like won't leave the house. But anyway, my point is essentially that
His
that
name
was
is Tom, by the way.
Tom, right? So that was a confrontation that was supposed to have a lot built into it, and instead she goes over, and as she walks over, she's holding up the watch, and she says, "It was him all along. It was Dad. He's going to save us all." And then she hugs him, and like I was just like, "What is going on?" Like, first of all, if she had just said nothing and she had just walked up to him and hugged him, that would have been a better scene to begin with. Not perfect, but it would have been better than saying all that stuff out loud. So yeah, like there was a lot to be desired in that final wrap up there. But yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? It's already such a long movie, but yeah, you got to manage your time better than that if you're going to have any sort of real payoff there.
But see, those are always my the issues that I have with
gripes.
movies of this scale, is that they tackle so much and they still end up being so long. And I know that for what they had, for it still being 3 hours and having to really still rush all of this stuff, they did a good job. But once you see, like, it just gets to be tiring to me, kind of, that we just keep discovering new things over and over and over again. There's new plot lines, there's new things, it's constantly, it's like this, now this, now this, now this. And so, I mean, I understand they don't want you to be bored. They definitely don't want you to be bored, but instead of being bored, I get tired, exhausted. Do you guys have that feeling?
I don't, again, because this is kind of my type of movie, and so that's a preference thing for sure. But I think it's very fair critique to say that like the characters need to do, or they need to have kind of they need to get more of their due in these types of scenes, right? Because this movie, again, what I like is that at its core, it is about a father and a daughter and that bond and just trying to get back to her, right? And so you got to do a better job in that payoff if that's going to be kind of the focus. So, I mean, fair critique, I think. I wasn't as tired as you, but I still have a problem with that kind of closure as much as the next guy.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that they started the movie like halfway through and made a way to just, fill in the first half of the movie into the rest of it through, I don't know, flashbacks or something like that. I hate flashbacks, but you know what I mean. I kind of wish they just did that. Like Gravity. You guys seen Gravity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how they did, they basically started in the middle of a movie that could have started with her being on land and then learning about this mission that she had to go on to be an astronaut and all this stuff, right? But that's what they did in this movie. You have to see it from the very beginning, and it's like sometimes you don't. Sometimes the rest of it is filled in, and you can gather what's happening from the rest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that. Like, if they had started the movie later and just flashed back to some of the scenes of him, like, leading up to his departure, then it might have worked just as well, right? I think some of those scenes are crucial, but you do it in a flashback so that you don't have to, get from point A to point B so linearly, right? I could totally see that.
I mean, it's the same thing in Tenet. They have to start from arguably the beginning. Who knows?
No, yeah.
Same thing with Batman. Dunkirk completely does away with all of that, though.
Yeah,
I think that's where the art is you're not having to explain the art is finding the art in the moments where you need to find it. Does that make sense? Not having to go through every single, like, okay, now this is the beginning, this person is born, now they're a child, and now they're this, and they're not doing that here, but that's kind of like, starting from the very beginning and then having to go through every single plot point, and that's why it gets to be exhausting in a 3-hour movie. That this isn't a 3-hour movie like that's slow. It's not a slow movie.
Right, it's fast paced all the way.
It's just 4 billion things happening,
There's a lot of things to process.
Yeah.
One thing I did like at the beginning of the movie, they use kind of the there's like a documentary going on that kind of explains like what was going on Earth beforehand, right? So little Easter egg here, right? That if you're paying attention to those scenes, they're talking about the conditions of Earth and how they were in the past tense. So essentially, you already know that these are survivors of the entire calamity of Earth. I mean, they're survivors who got away from Earth, right? So you actually know the outcome of the movie, that they're gonna succeed in getting away from the planet right there. And Murph is actually in that. She's
the first one.
Right, old woman Murph, she's in there, and she says, my father was a farmer, but it didn't always start out that way. So they do a good job of kind of tying that in, and you see that documentary come in towards the end of the movie to kind of show you where things are matching up. But I did like that. They probably could have used that to better effect, right? To kind of progress things even further down the road to as an initial starting point for this movie, perhaps. But I did like that tie-in there.
She has the first and last lines of dialogue in this movie.
I think that's appropriate, right? She's Faraz, you were saying earlier, she kind of is the real hero of this movie.
Yeah, and I really like that about this movie, that she's like I guess she's kind of going under the radar for most of the movie, but she's the one that comes out on top as the hero.
They have that funny scene towards the end where Cooper kind of says like, "Wow, I'm glad they that's nice of them to name the station after me," and then the nurse kind of cracks up and they're like, "Oh, it's actually named after your daughter," but okay. And nobody believes in his contribution to their survival at all, other than Murph.
Yeah.
Underappreciated characters in this movie, Tars and Case. I think they were awesome, actually. I think that was kind of a stroke of genius for some comedic relief without having to have like a character be like goofy, right? You can't have like a slap happy astronaut just kind of in the middle of this mission, but they use kind of the robots to do it. I thought it was really funny at certain points, especially when they use what was it? They have like there's like a light on Tars that lights up every time he's being sarcastic. So it's like humor sensor. I thought they used that to really good effect. So that was kind of a nice way to blend that into the fabric of this movie.
Those weren't CGI, by the way.
The robots at all?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
They're like, I forget what they call them, like practical puppets or something like that. Like, yeah.
No, that's really cool. And I mean, I think where there was CGI in this movie, it was perfect. And I think that we've discussed this at length why I like that. But one scene is sticking out in my mind where the spaceship is crossing in front of Saturn, and it's just like this tiny blip of light on the screen, kind of translating across the screen in front of Saturn. That was one of my favorite shots. And then, of course, anything with the black hole. I mean, so those scenes, obviously, those were simulated, but they were just done to perfection. And the depictions of what a black hole would look like with the halo around it have since been verified by actual science and actual imaging taken from black holes. So, I mean, hats off there, I think.
Yeah. Really good stuff visually, for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, yeah, so let's wrap it up. That's our discussion on Interstellar. Obviously, there's more that we could talk about, but we've already gone pretty long here. And I think we've covered most of the movie and also what we individually liked and also had some problems with. Yusuf, Farhan, you guys got anything?
I think
No.
try to find this movie in a theater somewhere, man. It's worth it if you do. But if you don't, I mean, I'm sure TVs are catching up. 4K will be fine.
Or just put your phone in a virtual reality headset and put some headphones on.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe that's an alternative.
All right, guys.
All right,
Cool.
guys, that's us signing off.
Thanks for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend. Want to see what your tally is? Check out thetwiceover.com. All the movies we've done are listed there, as well as what we're watching for the current week. Follow us at The Twice Over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can leave us any suggestions, feedback, or comments. And if you're about it, you can also support us on Patreon. The music you hear on this podcast is from Amerigo Gazaway. You can find his work on Bandcamp and Spotify.